It's a great privilege, Madam Rajavi, Madam Chair, ladies and gentlemen, to be here to remember and to reflect upon the infamy of August, September, October 1988, when so many thousands of political prisoners were executed without trial, without decency, and without mercy. It is the worst single event of the post-war period, the killing of prisoners of war. After all, it is for hundreds of years. It has been a rule in war, in peace. You do not kill prisoners without trial, and yet that happened, and it is a most terrible memory that I believe is unforgivable and unforgettable, because Iran had so successfully hushed it up, had lied and lied and lied to the United Nations when it happened, and had pulled the wool over the eyes, had fooled a very stupid rapporteur who didn't take it seriously. And so this hideous crime, this heinous crime, was covered up. Let me just remind you for a moment what happened. In prison in the 1980s were many, many young people, idealistic students who'd handed out mujahideen placards or pamphlets and had been taken to prison. Anyone who had been thought to be a leader was killed. The Ayatollah simply had them killed. So the people in prison were not ringleaders, were not in any way suggested violent, but were, and most of them had served their sentence. They were Melikesh. They had been served 8, 9, 10 years, and yet they were still in prison. And that was when, after the Ayatollah said he drank the cup of poison and made peace with Iraq, with Saddam Hussein, that is when he gave the wicked order, and it was one of the most wicked orders ever given, faithfully implemented by Rafsanjani and by the current supreme leader, handed out to the death squads, the judges. The poor Mahmoudi was one of them. He always voted for guilt. He's now the Minister of Justice. They sent the death squads into the prisons and they asked a simple question: are you still loyal to the Mujahideen? Do you still have connections? And if there was any indication that they were, they put them on a conga line. And the conga line led to the prison amphitheater or auditorium, and they were hung 6 at a time from ropes. That was what it was like in the prison auditoriums. They hung them from cranes 6 at a time. And they killed men and anyone connected with the Mujahideen, man or woman or young person was hanged. In the case of the communists, they killed all the men. The women they simply tortured. They lashed 5 times a day. Many of them were so affected that they committed suicide. But it's not just barbarity. It was clearly a crime against humanity, and I believe it was genocide, because genocide is the extinction of part of a group for religious reasons. And the Mujahideen were extinguished because, all of them in prisons, because they did not comport with the society, the kind of tyrannous, authoritarian political theocracy that the Ayatollah wanted to introduce. And the communists, of course, and the Marxists, they were executed because they weren't religious. And that, too, is genocide, because it is genocide if you execute a group of people because they do not believe. Under the Genocide Convention, the world has a duty never to forget, never to forgive genocide. In Bangladesh, the 1971 genocide is now being tried and punished. The UN has set up a court in Cambodia to punish the genocide there of 1979. These are before. International justice, I do not despair of. It grinds slowly, but it's caught up with 1971, it's caught up with 1979. I believe that one day it will catch up with the genocide in Iran, in 21 Iranian prisons in 1988. And putting it in perspective, the killing of prisoners was condemned at the end of the Second World War. The Japanese marched 7,000 American and Filipino prisoners to death. And that was a wicked crime for which those who organized it were executed by firing squad, the Japanese generals. And we have now General Mladic is on trial for killing 7,000 Muslim men and boys in Srebrenica. So that let us remember that international law imposes a duty one day to catch up with these people. And I believe that the United Nations, the Human Rights Council, the Security Council have a duty under the Genocide Convention, which is part of customary international law, to maintain a position, to set up a prosecutor, to set up an ad hoc court. After 2002, let us move to Camp Ashraf. We know the background to those 3,000 members of the MEK, and let us remember America. America, after the 2003 invasion, promised faithfully that they would accept the position, the status of members of Camp Ashraf as protected persons under Geneva Convention 4. That means they must be treated humanely, they must be given priority for protection. In law, in my view, if you're a protected person, you stay protected in law until the need for that protection passes. And my goodness, how in these last terrible and frightening weeks has that protection been needed more than ever? Because we know the feelings whipped up by Iran in Iraq against those of Camp Ashraf / Liberty. In 2009, 9 of them were killed and hundreds of them were injured in an attack by the Iraqi police and army. In 2011, we had 34 killed and more were injured, and then, of course, 52 killed. There must be a concerted effort by the UNHCR to provide them with refugee status and refuge, because they are all refugees. Well, I don't perhaps despair, as I say, of international justice. It does move slowly. It didn't move for the people of Syria. I wrote an article in The Guardian a couple of years ago when only 500 people had been gunned down by the Assad regime, and said this must now be referred to the International Criminal Court. Efforts were made. You could see the banners of the people were saying al-Assad to The Hague. It was their expectation. We had fostered that expectation, and we didn't deliver on it. It is difficult. The Human Rights Council is trying to deliver on Sri Lanka at the moment. It has decided on another international inquiry. Because it tilts against Israel, I suspect it has set up an inquiry 2 days ago with William Shabas, who is a very fine lawyer. He was with me on the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in Sierra Leone. And so the UN Human Rights Council can slowly move. But I think here, in relation to the events of 1988, we must hope and we must expect, because crimes don't disappear. There is no time limit. There is no deadline for prosecuting crimes against humanity. And certainly no deadline for prosecuting genocide. So in the first case, as far as Camp Ashraf is concerned, Iraq at the moment is a failing state. There is a responsibility to protect those civilians, innocent people whose lives are in danger in a failing state, and that responsibility for those 2,600 who stay there remains in international law on the Security Council and the organizations of the United Nations. And let us, as far as the criminals who ordered the slaying of thousands upon thousands of prisoners, let us remember that that is the vilest crime of all, that it can never be forgiven or forgotten, and that there is a remaining international law duty to deal with that genocide, to deal with that massive crime against humanity of 1988, and just as some of those guilty of perpetrating events in 1971 in Bangladesh and 1979 in Cambodia are only now being caught up with. Let us work towards the day when the collars will be felt of some of those who participated, were involved, were complicit in the mass murders of 1988.